want to tell you a story about the current state of affairs of APU parking. So there was once this guy, and his name was Charles. So imagine basically the most perfect life you could ever think of. Charles was graduated from a prestigious university. He instantly ran out of college, got the job of his dreams. He met a girl and fell madly in love in college, and they got married, and they were so happy together. And his life was doing pretty great. So one day he's feeling a little sick, but he doesn't think much about it because there's a virus going around at work. And so he thinks like, okay, it's just a common cold. That's fine. And so he waits a week and he just feels continually just worse and worse and worse. And so finally his wife's like, you know what, you should just go get checked out. I mean, what's the harm? You know, best case scenario, you just, nothing happens. Worst case scenario, you actually find out something's wrong with you. So he's convinced. He says, okay, fine. Fine, honey. Whatever you want. I'll go to the doctor. So he goes to the doctor, and so mind you, this doctor is amazing. He has been in his own private practice for 20 years. He has been published in a number of scholarly journals for his research. And he's just a really good doctor. So Charles goes to this doctor to see what's wrong with him. And his doctor says, okay, I figured out what's wrong with you. It's really not a big deal, but you do need to take this medicine. So Charles is like, okay, good. I was worried it was something big. So he gets the prescription and he goes down to the pharmacy to get the prescription filled. And the pharmacist says, okay, that'll be $100. And Charles is like, excuse me? What? The doctor said I was gonna be fine. This probably isn't that essential. It's probably just like some preventative thing that I would have been good with anyways. I'm okay. Don't worry about it. Keep your prescription. I'm good. Thank you. So he goes back home. And next week, he feels the same. Next week he feels the same. Next week he feels the same. But after a month, he's starting to feel really bad. He's getting chronic pain in his body. It's getting harder and harder for him to get out of bed, harder and harder for him to do his job. And now his wife is really worried about him. And so finally he fesses up and tells his wife, hey, there was this prescription that the doctor told me to take, but I thought it was too expensive, so I didn't take it. Is there any way you could go down to the pharmacy and get me this prescription? And so the wife's like, oh my goodness, yes, I will go immediately get your prescription. Don't worry about it, it's taken care of. So the wife goes down to the pharmacy to get the prescription, and obviously the pharmacist says, sorry, but this prescription is invalid. It's been too long. You're going to have to go see your actual doctor to get it either filled or to get a new diagnosis. And so she's like, okay. So the next morning, she basically has to carry him into the car because he's in so much pain he can barely move his body. She drives him down to the doctor's office, and the doctor says, what happened? Didn't you take your medicine? And Charles says, I didn't think it was that important. And so the doctor says, well, now that you'll listen to me, it's like, what do you want me to do? I'm only as good as the tools I give you. And so Charles says, there has to be something. And so the doctor said, okay, you know what? There's invasive options. We can try surgery. We can try some experimental drugs, but essentially it's up to you and your wife. These aren't going to be approved by your insurance. It would be a huge sacrifice. And so him and his wife talk about it. They think it over. And then a week later, they say, okay, let's do the surgery. And so Charles is getting prepped and ready for surgery, but they end up not being able to do the surgery. And Charles actually ends up dying right before going into surgery. So that is the state of the current situation at APU. However, there is an alternative story that I would now like to tell as to what should happen so that Charles doesn't die. Let's save Charles. So Charles is in his hospital room. He's by himself. This is before, he's just under observation. This is before they've done any sort of treatment, any sort of surgery, any sort of anything. So he's by himself, and he's just thinking about his life. He's thanking God for what he's been given. He's just really having a grateful heart, and he just feels in his heart that, you know what, I think there's still a lot of years left in my life. I feel it. And then he cries out to God for mercy, and this feeling is confirmed. He feels like, you know what, no, there's more years left in me. I'm not done yet. And so Charles, his wife's name was Jessica, and so she actually grew up going to this doctor. You know, he's had his own private practice for about 20 years, and so he was basically their family doctor. So Jessica goes up to Jessica goes up to the doctor, and she's crying, and she's worried about losing Charles, because this is the love of her life, you know? They're in a very happy marriage, besides the fact that he's basically dying. And so, she knows and remembers, you have been published for your research before in experimental medication. I haven't read your studies, I don't know exactly what it is, but if there's any way you could do this, I want to save my husband. It's not done yet. The story is not over. And so the doctor says, I mean, I could look into it, but it's going to take a lot of money, and I don't have that type of personal money. I'm going to need something from you. I know insurance isn't going to cover it because it's experimental, but I need something. And so she ends up selling their house and car and moving back in with her parents. And she comes back to him after the sale's complete, and she has the money, and she says, here, I have it. Let's try it. Anything, absolutely anything, to save my husband. He's the love of my life. And so the doctor says, okay, let's do it. And so he has the experimental medicine ready, and he gives some to Charles, and guess what? Charles starts to get a lot better. He's starting to feel better, he's starting to talk more, he's starting to just generally feel good. And so they continue with treatments, and all of a sudden, it goes from good to bad. Charles's body starts rejecting the treatment. And the wife is devastated, obviously, because this is the love of her life. And so, day by day, his body, it just keeps protesting, and he just gets sicker and sicker and sicker. And the doctor reminds the couple, like, you knew this was a possibility, you know? I'm sorry, I'm doing what I can, but you knew this could happen. And so finally one day, Charles completely stops breathing, and his heart stops beating, and Charles is laying on the table dead. And for a second, it feels like Jessica's heart stops beating as well, but it doesn't. And so as there's a whirlwind of doctors and machines all flatlining and everything, all the chaos that comes with, you know, dying happens. Charles is meeting Jesus. And so Charles is talking to Jesus, saying like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for such an amazing life. But you know, now I've left my wife with no house, living with her parents, and no car. That's not what I wanted to leave. And what was it? Like, I love being here with you, but what was it about the fact that you said that I had more years left in me? I really don't think that was just me, like, wishful thinking. I think that was something real. And so, Jesus looks him straight in the eyes, and he says, I'm not done with you yet. And instantly his heart starts beating again. First it's a slow beat, then it starts getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and Charles completely pulls out of this scare. However, with any recovery story, that's the first of many setbacks. Jessica receives a lot of the worst of it, because Jessica's parents, they end up telling her, look at the situation you're in. Was this worth it? We don't think it was. We don't think you made the right choice. You're now left with a husband who can't work. You're left with living with us with no car. Was this worth it? So they face resistance on that front. Now, they have medical bills that are piling up. The house only paid for so much of it. They're facing resistance on that front. But you know what they do have? They have hope. They have a vision for the future. And Charles is continuing to get better. It's slow. Not every day looks the same. But the general trend is that Charles is getting better. And as long as that hope persists, he'll continue to get better. Eventually, Charles was actually discharged from the hospital. But unfortunately, the neurological damage was so severe that it made it unlikely that Charles will ever walk again. Not impossible, but unlikely. Thank you for listening.